Hello from Cork.
Hello from New York.
It's Misha Moira Shanachie Corky. It's Mariah, the Cork-based storyteller.
It's me, Jim, here in Fayetteville, New York.
We can't wait to tell you a few stories.
So welcome everyone to this episode of From Cork to New York. As you know, we started off just Cork to New York, and now we've spread our wings and we're bringing in storytellers from around the world, and it's just a delight. Today we have Denise Paige with us, and it's a real joy to be able to bring her to you, all of you, and to let her share her story and her life with you all. So, Denise, welcome. I'm going to start us off today. So, I've had this interesting encounter with a story that led me to another story, the way this world works. But some time ago, we told a story, Mariah told a story about a midwife in Cork. And of course, that reminded me of a story that I knew about a midwife in Dakar. Recently, I started researching stories from another part of the world, and I was looking at the Kven people, which are some of the indigenous people of Northern Finland. And what do you know? They have the story too. They have a story about a woman who travels under the ground to the mirror world. And they have a mirror world. And she travels under there to be a midwife. And it's the same story from that point forward. But that just tickled me to no end to find that story in yet another place. But that's all been part of a bigger exploration, which has led me to North Africa. Of course, where else would you go from Finland but to North Africa? And this is a story from the Kabyle people. And it's a story about a young man who was just a remarkable metalsmith. Now, at that time, and for those people, metalsmithing was kind of the most important thing you could do because you could make swords with metal, and they were people who had to defend themselves all the time. So this one smith, he could make the best swords, and he was treasured by the community. He didn't like making swords. So he was glad when the battles would subside and the need would die down, because he would make plowshares. And you would think that that was his true love. But his real true love was in singing. And he would sing of places, he would sing of flowers, he would sing of healing. He just loved to sing, and he was good. People loved his songs, and not just because he had a good voice, but because when he sang, he took you to where he was singing about, just like in stories. And the favorite song that his community loved was his song about the Valley of Paradise. And this was a song that could go on for hours and hours. And he would sing about the beauty of this place and the birds that lived there and the streams that ran through it. And he would just go on. And everyone who listened was transported by this song. Now, he wouldn't always sing it. Sometimes people would say, "Come and sing us the story of the Valley of Paradise." He would say, "No, I can't go there right now." But usually he would. Now, this young smith also had a great love for this woman who lived in the village. He was very attracted to her. She was sweet. She was pleasant to look at. She knew how to move. And he really did hope that he would be able to win her hand. But someone as wonderful as that had more than one suitor, of course. And there was another fellow who was a merchant, and he knew that the smith was going to win because of his singing. And so he started sowing seeds of doubt in the young woman's mind. He said, this smith, he keeps telling stories about this valley of paradise, but I don't think they're true. I think he's making it all up. And the seed of doubt got sown. And so she went up to him and she said, these songs you sing of the Valley of Paradise, is it real? And he paused for a moment and he said, as real can be. Well, that didn't satisfy her, and she kept pressing. And finally, the merchant arrived, seeing what was going on, knowing he had the opportunity. He said, if it's real, why don't you go there and bring us back proof? And the smith said, oh, it doesn't work that way. And the merchant turned to the woman and said, you see, you can't trust him. How can you marry someone that you can't trust? And the smith, well, he saw what was happening. And so he gathered his belongings together and he said, I will go and I will bring back proof. And with that, he headed out. Now, the land of the Kabyle is full of rugged mountains. It's very difficult terrain. And so he started climbing mountains and scaling down valleys and crossing dangerous rivers. And he went on for day after week after week. More than once he came close to losing his life. But finally he reached the valley. And words can't quite describe what he found there. Much time went by until he finally returned to the village. But when he returned to the village, he had aged. No one else had, but he had aged like you wouldn't believe. He was bent over, his hair was long and scraggly, his clothes were torn. He walked with a cane. In fact, the first person to recognize him was the merchant. Everybody thought he was just some, itinerant moving through. And he called out to him, Smith, Smith, did you find the valley? And people gathered around, including the young woman. And he said, yes, I did, but everyone could see that he was broken. They said, was it not what you expected? He said, well, when I got there, it was beautiful, even more beautiful than I could sing about. And everyone there was just like us. And people said, what do you mean, just like us? You mean they were people like us, not something else? He said, no, they were just like me. They were just like you. Every one of us in this village was in that valley. And I thought, how strange that there should be these reflections of us in this beautiful valley. And then I understood. They weren't reflections of me. I was a reflection of them. It's not they who were the illusion. It's me, it's us. At that, everybody just looked at him and laughed. And in that moment, the young woman decided she indeed would marry the merchant. Within a few days, the smith had withered and died. And not long after that, anyone who had heard the story from his lips also withered and died. Because what they failed to realize was not that they were an illusion, but that we all have many, many more lives than we could ever realize. And the path we choose to follow should be one that takes us to where we truly want to go. And that's my story from the Kabyle people.
That's lovely, Jim.
Oh, so much wisdom, you know?
That's
Yeah.
a lot in that story to unpack. Yeah.
There is, and I'd been wrestling with it because I didn't like it to begin with. You know, I didn't like the everyone withers who hears this.
Yeah.
But it's grown on me. It's grown on me.
It brought me back to I guess well, there was a period in my life where I spent a lot of time thinking about the 3 dimensions of time and how we were existing in all 3 dimensions simultaneously. And one of my friends that I told a story about it at Woodstock, she and I spent so much time with that and trying to prove it. And so this story, when he went there and you said they were us, I thought, oh, it brought me back to that.
Yeah, and there's something similar for me because in the Irish tradition, we talk about the time outside time, you know, the time that could still be going on, you know, and I suppose we would have always known that time was circular and it would have been in the old carvings, the ancient ones, I mean, from Stonehenge, where you had the spirals. And there's one spiral where there's 3 intersecting, and they call that, you know, there's people are just kind of surmising what does it mean. But one of the popular things that it's the life-death life cycle, and how nothing is lost in that, you know. So
right. Yeah, beautiful.
A story to chew on.
Yeah, a story to chew on it.
And so I'm wondering now, Denise, if that has lit something in you.
I do want to share. I'm not sure either one of you have heard this story. It is a story I tell a lot, and it is I call it my premiere story with air quotes, because the first time I told it was at a community event and we had index cards that you could keep. I'm not sure I actually used them, but I know I wouldn't have gotten through it without them. Anyway, so I consider it my launch story. And this story, along with the person who didn't ask, she demanded that I be a storyteller. So between the person who demanded that and my need to tell this story, those are the 2 reasons that I became a storyteller, this story and the person that pushed me to do it. So with no further ado, the story is Mariah. And it's a story told to me by my mother about herself. When I was growing up, I heard so few stories about my mother. Hardly any stories about my mother at all as a child. And most of the stories that I did hear came from her. They were very, very few. I heard more stories from her when she was older in the years that she met my dad. But until then, they were so sparse, and I longed for them. I longed to know my mother as a little girl, to know more about her childhood. And I would beg her, please, Mommy, please tell me the story that she told most often, the story called Mariah. And on this particular day that I'm going to share with you, she did tell me the story of Mariah, and she told me a second part that I had never heard before. At this point, I was about 13 or 14 years old, and I think she just thought maybe I was ready to hear it. And so, very excitedly, because she had agreed to tell this story, I curled up in the big red reading chair, but also the listening chair, and waited expectantly for her story. And she began, my mother, Dorothy. Niecy, that's what she called me. Niecy. When I was a very little girl, I was 7 years old actually. I was 7 years old and it was 1927. And I would be tucked very tightly in a cot in a sparsely furnished room. The only light in the room came from the gas street lights below. And across from me, a few feet, lay my recently widowed mother, also tucked tightly in a cot. You see, I know it was 1927 and I was 7 years old because my dad had died just a few months before from tuberculosis. And now I was in the room where I came weekends only to be with my mom. I would be lying in this cot, listening desperately for sounds of life from her. Any sound of wheezing, gasping, but nothing but silence. Mama, mommy, I would cry out in my spirit, but I wouldn't say it out loud because I was afraid of no response. Or really, what would I ask her? So I'd lie in bed and I'd wait patiently for the coming of Midnight Mariah. Now, Midnight Mariah isn't what she was called. It was a train that came through New Haven on Saturday evenings about midnight every week. And Midnight Mariah is the name I gave her. And in my very young life, she had become one of the very few constants that remained. It was just sheer fear and daughterly love that kept me awake until midnight. And then gently, before I saw her or heard her, there'd be this faint rocking in my cot, just ever so slightly swaying. And then the big one-eyed light of Mariah would appear and light up the room momentarily. And then as she exited, she would lean on her horn, and I had heard the as she exited. But in that moment that there was light, I snuck a look at my mother, looking for the rise and fall of her chest. And then, gathering my courage, Mommy? Mommy, did you hear her? Did you hear old Mariah blow her big old horn? And then after what seemed like an interminable silence, the length of time, my mother would whisper, Yes, Dorothy, I heard her. Now you get your rest. You'll need it for Sunday school tomorrow. Well, with that, comforted with the knowledge that God had spared me and my little sister Edwina, your aunt, from being orphans at least for one more day. With that comfort, I turned to go to sleep. And when I closed my eyes, I would dream about the place that we would go when our family was healthy, when everyone was healthy. Well, I'm not sure it was dreaming. It might have been more like remembering. But anyway, it would be this place. It would be the place where the Queen Anne's lace and the blueberry bushes, they tumbled along the mountainside and spilled into the Connecticut River below. It was the place where the Victorian house sat high on the hill in Deep River, Connecticut. It was the home of my grandmother's sister and her husband. And when my parents had been healthy, in the summers and some weekends, we would go there as family and spend this time with them in this house that was full of porcelain wash basins and down coverlets. It was filled with art and books and music and love and laughter, just like our house was. Our house in New Haven, where our family lived, that too was filled with books, my mother's great love, and art everywhere. The art was the work of my dad, and our house was abundant with love and laughter and good health. Well, I think on these evenings, on these weekends, I dreamt of the place in Deep River, not of our home in New Haven, because the last time I had been to Deep River, that house was still filled with all the abundance of life well lived. But our house had slowly been stripped by the illnesses that had come to visit, the tuberculosis that took my dad, and the cancer that my mom was fighting. The books and the art were no longer a part of that home. And so dreaming of Deep River, it gave me a sense of comfort and hope for the future, remembering when life was well lived. Well, Nisi, of course, those weekend visits with my mom came to an end as she succumbed to the breast cancer. And with her passing, your Aunt Edwina and I, overnight, we had gone from the panache of being the daughters of Edwin Manning Yaley to the stigma of being wards of the state. And in 1927, you can believe that was a stigma. You see, when my dad was alive, he had an art studio on State Street in New Haven. You know State Street. He had an art studio there. And when I was a little girl, he sometimes would take me there when he was healthy on the weekends, and I would help him paint. You see, he was a sign painter. And as he was painting these signs and letting me help, he would say, "Now, Dorothy, I may have been a Yale School of Arts student, but like most people with a fine arts degree, you got to find something practical to do to earn a living. And folks always need themselves a good hand-painted sign." And this, Nisi, this is where he would also repeat his oft-repeated mantra. "Now, you know, Dorothy, not everybody can afford to go to college, but it's a darn fool who doesn't get all the free education that's available to them." Well, when my parents were gone, remembering those words and knowing someone had told me that my dad had been able to squirrel away a little bit of money that the state wouldn't be able to touch. And that money was so that I and your aunt could go to college when the time came. The knowledge that there was a nest egg for me to do that, and the memory of those words, and the memory of our intact family with culture and art and music, that's what sustained me. That's what kept me holding on to my dignity, my sense of self, my sense of purpose. Usually, when my mother told me this story, it would stop here. And of course, my eyes would well with tears of the thought of living a life with no parents. But on this particular evening, she went further. And she started with what I call her only brag. And she bragged about this every time she referenced this. It started with, in 1936, when I was 16 years old and starting teachers college, at 16 years old, you see, her only brag. Okay. When I started teachers college with what was left of the money that my dad had left so that your aunt and I could go to college. And it wasn't really enough money to get me all the way through. And so I got a part-time job to supplement the cost of tuition. And I got this job. It was in the East Rock section of New Haven. And I worked as a weekend domestic and seamstress. And I really enjoyed this job. You know how much I love sewing, and it was a decent enough job. But there were two things that worried me. You see, the family, the Mr. and Mrs., they used to air their dirty laundry in front of me. Well, it was even worse than that. It wasn't like in front of me, it was almost like to me. Like they couldn't wait for me to come so they can unload all the stuff that they wouldn't share in their social circle. You see, unburdened, but still be able to wear the mask. This bothered me because it made me feel less than. And I wasn't interested in their dirty laundry. And the missus, when she would get tipsy, she would tell me even the most intimate details about her husband. And her husband, well, when he was in his cups, and that was most nights after work, that's what she called it, he would leer at me in a way that made me feel unsafe. And so I knew it was time for me to find another job, a job that would give me the money to supplement my tuition, but would have a schedule that would allow me to keep going to school. And so this one particular day, I'm walking along Ashford Street. Now I have to tell you, I don't know why I was on Ashford Street, Nisi. It was way on the opposite side of town from where I lived, and nothing in my life had ever caused me to come over to that side of town. But whatever the reason, there I was. And I had in mind that I had to get this job. And I'm walking along Ashford Street, and even though I knew I had never been there before, it was hauntingly familiar. But nonetheless, in my walk, I noticed a dry cleaner. And the dry cleaner has a sign in the window, presser wanted. Well, I knew I could press. No seamstress worth her salt. Every seamstress worth her salt knows how to press. It's a significant part of being a good seamstress. And so with a little trepidation, I walked in. This was an all-white neighborhood, and this was a white establishment. And much of New Haven was all white then, but some more all white than others. And this was one of those. And I go in, and behind the counter is a kindly eyed, blue eyed man with bushy white eyebrows. And he looks kindly enough. And I approach him, and still with a bit of trepidation, I ask for an application. He hands it to me, and I fill it out. I hand it back. He mutters something, and I mumble something in response. I'm already defeated. I'm not going to get hired in this establishment. I turn to walk out, still keeping my pride intact. And as I approach the door and put my hand on the knob, the room begins to sway just ever so slightly. And then and one of the afternoon trains comes rumbling by. And I don't know what that did to me, Nisi, but for some reason, it gave me courage or something. I can't explain it, but for some reason, I turned around and I yelled to the man. He was now heading to the back of the establishment. His back was to me, but I said, excuse me, sir, excuse me. Could you tell me when I might hear something, one way or the other? He turns around, and my application is still in his hand. I don't think he had looked at it yet, but I grew strength from the fact that it wasn't yet in the trash. And then before he could say anything, I twirled around with this confidence. I don't know where it came from. You see, I had on an accordion pleated skirt that I had made. And I said to him, I made the skirt myself, sir. I pressed all the pleats in myself. I'm not only a fine presser, I'm a seamstress. I can do alterations. Now, he looks down at the application. He looks back up at me. Manning, he says. Dorothy Manning? Yes. Ah, well, I know a fine colored gentleman by the name of Edwin Manning. Any kin of yours? And then, you see, the room was no longer swaying gently. It was spinning wildly. My father, I whisper. My father is Edwin Manning. Why, he was a fine gentleman, Mr. Edwin Manning. Folk tell me he was a Yalie. I knew better than to respond to that because I really needed this job. I bought this place from him, he says. And then I look up at the industrial ceiling fan. Of course, it hadn't been there when it had been our home, the Manning family home in New Haven. When it had been our home, this had been a regular sitting room, our front parlor, and the walls had been lined with books and art, my father's art. And of course, he didn't have that commercial window in the front. This was our home. This was the home where years before I had been on just 2 flights up on the 3rd floor, spending my last time with my mother before the thievery of cancer took her away. Our family home. When can you start? He says to me. And so it was, Nisi. And so it was that for the next 2 years, I sat in the back of my family home, now the dry cleaning establishment. I sat in the back in the kitchen with the heat from the pressing tables. I sat in the back doing gratefully and competently the job he had hired me to do. I sat in the back knowing, now don't come out in the front to wait on customers. You understand? They may not understand. You understand? And of course, I understood. And so it was that in 1936, I hid. I hid in the back in the kitchen of the home that my father had owned. And before him, my grandfather. In 1860 something, the home that a Black man, a Negro, a colored man had owned. And I sat in the back, hiding, pressing clothes. And you know what? I was grateful. I was grateful that even from the grave, my dad and his mantra, get all the education you can, and the memory of Midnight Mariah rumbling by, they had made a way for me to do exactly that.
Oh my goodness, Denise. What a legacy, Garlene. What a history.
Yeah.
Wow, does that put steel into the spine of Denise? I bet it does.
You can imagine when she first told me that, I thought, all these years you've told me that story, you never told me the second part. You said you had to be ready. I knew you'd have a reaction. You had to be ready.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, the power of the ancestral stories.
Yeah.
So,
and how trauma robs us of our memories, because that story is actually the first story in a trilogy I do called Legacy of a Wealthy Slave.
yeah.
And as I said, that story I had been doing because I always wanted to tell that story for my mother.
Yeah.
And she wasn't alive when I told it, but yeah.
Oh, so many resonances, because my great grandmother was born in 1878. It was so she was she was the generation after the famine that halved the population. And I remember her. Oh my God! Like the stories that she told.
That's what I was going to ask. You heard the stories,
So I when you hear those stories, you think to yourself, and I remember her telling us this, that blood that was in me that helped me survive, that blood runs in you, Denise. That blood runs in you.
Exactly.
So there's
exactly, Maria. And without giving it away, the second part of the story, which obviously is the story of an ancestor I never knew existed until 2 years ago.
Oh my goodness.
Because of my mother being orphaned, all that family history was lost because she was too young for anybody to have told her anything. And that story, if you think this one puts steel in my spine, his story, in fact, I'm heading to his birthplace the end of this week, so I can stand in the space and feel him. But thank you for your.
I have to hear that story now. That story must be heard.
I'm doing it for Adam Booth's Speak on August 11th, which I think is going to be live streamed. So I'll be doing the whole thing then.
please send us the link so that we can attach it to the podcast for our listeners.
Oh, wonderful.
We'll do it. They will be going, you have to tell me that story. Because those stories, I suppose, are meat and potatoes to us. The whole one of the big functions of story is to give us the lessons so that we don't break our own backs trying to discover or reinvent the wheel, So, what a legacy to come from, what a bloodline, what resilience, I just bow before it. It's absolutely amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Denise, I want to ask what might seem like an obvious question, but I'm not sure the answer is obvious to everyone. What do you think your mother was afraid of that held her back from telling you the second part of the story? What was it that you had to be old enough to? And I just want to put that out.
I love that you asked that, Jim. So, of course, this was the 60s. And if you think what was going on in the 60s, and my parents used to say to me all the time, whenever I would see stuff on, because, I was raised in Connecticut, and I would see stuff on television, like the hosing of black folks in the Freedom Riders, and I would get very worked up. And my parents would say to me, that's why God had you born in Connecticut, because you would not have survived. You're so feisty, and I confront everything. I confront social injustice. I did from a little girl. And I grew up in the early part of my life. I lived in the city, but most of my life I lived in white suburban Connecticut. And she was afraid for me to have to carry that story as I walked among my peers, knowing how I responded to things. I had to be at a place where I could take that and put it in context. And then, so that's what it was, rather than feeling this anger toward,
Do you think she didn't know that you knew that already? You know what I'm saying?
Oh, here's what's interesting. I'm doing work on this because this has always fascinated me, and I know so much more about it now. She knew I knew it. My parents made sure I understood racism and discrimination and all that. And discrimination and prejudice, of course, happened to us all the time. But overt racism was something in my environment that only happened in the South.
Gotcha.
I had never had any evidence of it being, clamping down that way here. And that was really my first realization that, okay, we know you couldn't do certain things, but, we could go anywhere we wanted, as could my mother in the 1920s in New Haven. There weren't restricted restaurants or theater or any of that. So that was the thing. It was like, I know it, but it was out there.
Gotcha.
And this brought it right into our family.
Thank you. That's what I expected, but I think sometimes it's good to make that explicit.
Yeah. Thank you for asking that.
I think, I suppose I would have a shade on that as well, because of Irish history that would have come down to us through our stories in particular. And when you're telling a story, stories are such a safe place where you can say the unsayable and where things can unfurl. And there is a time in your life when something will put an imprint on you. And I know that there were stories that I only received when I had found my own steel spine, when I knew who I was, so that you wouldn't be affected by the other making you less than because of where you were born, So
exactly.
Yeah. So there's
that's exactly it, Maria. Yes. Yeah. Thank you for that, Carl. Yes. Exactly right. Exactly right.
So it's amazing. But then once the stories are told in the safe distance of story, and also in the geographical safe distance of where you were in Connecticut, then they become, kind of a treasure. So they get changed, to transformed. And that's another great gift of story, the shape shifting,
Yes.
Yeah. So telling that story with the pride, the due pride of a granddaughter or a great granddaughter who is so proud of their root is then becomes like a gift. So, and I suppose you can be aware of that gift even in the circumstances that you find yourself in this day.
Absolutely.
You know, so you might kind of go, okay, that was a tough old day, but I survived it, you know.
Yes.
And now I can tell it to, like, you know, for me it would be the grandnieces and the grandnephews. And I love that. And I love the way sometimes the way they told us the story was by the questions that we asked. And I don't know if this is familiar to you, Denise, where you'd say, go on, Granny, tell me that story about, you know. And she'd say, well, what do you want to know of it? And in the what you want to know tells her how ready you are for the next hard bit.
You are so right. You are so right. And the second part of my story in the trilogy, I bring us back to the period in my life when I'm 5 or 6, when I would ask the specific questions of my mother.
Yeah.
And out would come, as I said, really, I can't, you know, there were like 2 stories from her. Because that's all there was. She was 7. All her stories were of death and dying. She chose not to share them with me, and I'm not mad at her for that. So So as I said, when she met my dad, then the story started again. But that period in between, that cleaner story is the only story I can remember her telling of her being in that age from 16 to 24. That's like the one story.
Wow. You know, that's amazing. And I look forward to hearing more and more stories from you, Denise.
Thank you.
And of course, in the tradition, it has reminded me of a story. So I will tell you this story now. And in our tradition, we change the names and the places because we're a small island country, and it would be very easy for people to go back and go, oh, I know who that was. So the names are changed, and the exact places in my city are changed. But here is the story. It was a time when the whole world seemed to be at war. They called it World War II. They called it the Great War. And in Ireland, they called it the emergency. And in my small little island country, who had just received her ability to be a Republic of Ireland, once again, after 800 years, we were not going to get involved in that big fight. And in 1938, my mom was born into Cork City. Well, people tell loads of stories about that time, and this is one of those stories. There was a woman, and she came down from the west of Ireland. In the west of Ireland, we have very stony ground, and people subsist mainly on the fishing that they would get from there, or on the food that they could get trundled in on the carts and the trains from the rest of Ireland. When she came into Cork City, she could not get over that butter was so freely available, and big floury potatoes, and fine, happy, healthy, laughing people. One of the things that you couldn't forgive somebody for in a time like that was being so multi-talented. And Nancy was that. She was a great seamstress, Denise, just like your people were. And she could make something from nothing in the larder so that it felt like a king's feast. She was able to buy clothes, and she was able to soak them in the carbolic soap. Then she'd unpick all the stitches, she'd turn the material inside out, and she'd make brand new coats from it. Oh, she was the talented woman. And all the time, she'd be singing songs as she was at her work. And the women of Cork, they looked on her, and unkindly, they labelled her. And they kept her out a little bit, because Cork, even though it's my city, can be a clannish city. And if you knew the history, you would know the reason why that's so. And so they gave Nancy the name Nancy of the Notions. That one. She have notions, so she does. She had notions for herself to become as educated as possible, and she had dreams for her children. Well, she had no children yet and no man, so she went to the local dances in the clothes that she'd made herself that looked as if they'd come off of the catwalk in Paris. And in those days, all the men would line up on one side of the room and all the women would line up on the other, and they'd start playing the music and the men would start smoking away. And nobody would be dancing because the women would be waiting for the men to make the move. Until the man said, "Well, now it's ladies' choice." And Nancy sailed across the room with eyes on only one man, Harry. Harry was a musician. His smile came easy. He was strong because he was a docker in Cork City and lifted barrels every day. And as she came across the room, and as they began to look into one another's eyes, the room disappeared for everybody but the two of them. He took her out for one dance, two dances, three dances. And the women of Cork said, "Look at her, the cheek, throwing the glad eye at our Harry, the most eligible bachelor in the whole parish." And it wasn't long before they were walking out. And it wasn't long before the banns of the wedding were read from the altar, before they got married, and they settled in the marshes of Cork City. Oh, I can't even describe the marshes to you. To the outside world, they were deemed the worst of all of the slums in wartime Europe. But to the people who came out of the marshes, well, they talked about the great heart that people had and how they helped one another out and how they all had to depend on one another, to the extent that if the rent man was coming and you didn't have the money this week, you would say to your neighbour woman, "Tell him you haven't seen me." And then on the week that you paid your rent, you told him that you hadn't seen her. And they had one piece of precious cloth, and they saved it in blue paper and brown paper. And when this Donegal woven lace was on the line, you knew that there was big news. A child had been born, or somebody had gone to meet their maker, because it was the first cloth that young skin would touch, the richest of what they had to offer to this new hope for the community. And it was the last thing to go under the chin of a dying person, so that they knew they were still treasured as they went to see their maker. Well, Nancy could see all of this stuff going on, and where they could, they allowed that to happen, but they didn't make small talk with Nancy. They didn't make freedom with her. And she didn't mind because she had Harry, and then she had her ducks, 1, 2, 3, and one on the way. And Harry came back with the awful news that there was no work in the docks. They'd also put in an application that they might get one of the new houses that would be built on a hill in Cork City called Granabraher. Granabraher in the anglicised version. It means the love of the brothers, for a monastery had been on that hill once. So they were hoping for this little house, and he came back with the bad news, and he said, "I'm going to have to go to England." And something in her stomach fell. "I don't want you to go," she said. "I don't want to go," he said. "But I have to go." "We'll make do," she said. "No," he said, "I won't have that said of my children. I'm going with the neighbour men. We all grew up together. All will be fine." But she hadn't grown up with them. She did not know who they were. He left on the boat and he went to England. And as promised, in the first weeks, there was a letter every day. And they couldn't wait for the postman, so they'd run down the hill of Shandon to the post office and they'd get the letter. And Mom would read the bits to the children that was meant for them, and she would hold to her heart the silent pieces that were meant only for her own eyes. And once a week there'd be money in the envelope. And she'd take that money and she'd roll it up in with all of the other money that he had sent, and she'd put an elastic band around it and she'd put it into the middle of the tea caddy. Wouldn't he have a great surprise when he came home that she'd gathered this money and they might even be able to buy a house of their own? And she made do with her sewing and her baking and all of the little fipperies that she could sell. But then the letters stopped coming every day. And then the weekly letters stopped coming. And then she got a letter here and there. And when she'd look, there'd be no money in it. And then the letters dried up altogether. And she was fair concerned because it was going to be the confirmation of their eldest child. And he hadn't even thought to send a card. How would she explain that to their son? And she tried to keep their hearts up and their spirits going. And she got that little envelope saying that they were going to get a house in Granabraher. And they moved in, and that kind of kept her going for a while. And there was no money for furniture, so she bought the orange boxes from the traders down in the Colke, and she brought them up, and when they stood upright, and she put a cloth over them, that was their table. And when she laid them down on their side, that was their chairs. But with clever disguise, with a beautiful blanket that she had made herself, her place looked like a palace. And she lined her children up and she made them look out the window on the top of the hill over Cork City. And as the glimmer man, the man who lit the gas lights of Cork City, as he made his way around, it looked as if there was fairy lights coming to life outside their window. And she'd say, "Look at that. What more riches do we need? We're looking out over the fairyland of Cork City." And her children knew nothing of how she was feeling. One night, after the glimmer man had been and lit the lights of the city, there was a knock on the door. When she opened the door, she couldn't believe what she saw, for there was a policeman outside the door. Her hand went to her neck, her breath left her body. "And tell me," she said, "and tell me, is there bad news about my Harry?" And the policeman said, "I can't tell you anything here. You'll have to come with me, madam. We're going to walk to the police station." So out she went and she closed the door behind her. And it was a mark of how scattered she was that she left her children inside. In those days, as soon as you could talk, you were babysitting another child. But not in Nancy's house. Nancy had never left her ducks alone before. And they sat there now looking out through the banisters like steps and stairs on the stairs. She made her way down that hill of Cork, Cathedral Road it's known. Then they turned right onto Shandon Street, a steep hill, and they walked into the city and crossed the bridge to the Colke of Cork, the trading place, and into the Garda station that was there. "Oh my God, Nancy May is here. Did you see who's after coming into the guard station now? What did Nancy do?" said all the people inside the guard station. And she couldn't even hear it. She couldn't even feel it because she was so worried about the news that was to come. The policeman brought her to a back room in the guard station. And when the door opened, there was the priest with his stole around his neck. And he offered a seat to Nancy. And she was taking it all in one area of her brain, while the rest of her brain was in scrambled egg. The priest was asking her to sit down, And he was standing. Had the world turned topsy-turvy? She took the seat because she was afraid that her legs would give way, and she said, and Father, please don't make me wait, and tell me, is Harry dead? And the priest looked at her and he said, he's not dead, Nancy, but it might be better for you and your children if he was. What are you saying to me, Father? She said, and I can't understand. What are you saying to me? He came then and he held her hands and he asked her to call for the seal of the confession. Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. It's been 2 days since my last confession. And then he looked at the policeman and he said, everything that goes on in this room now is under the seal of the confession. The priest took off his hat and put it under his arm, and he said, and nothing is to leave this room. I hear you, Father, he said, and from this moment forward, I hear nothing. And he turned his back on the little scene. Then the priest said to Nancy, when he was younger, when he was 18, he went to England. There he met a woman and he got married in the Catholic Church. It is the first wedding. It came before yours, so your wedding is null and void in the eyes of the church. He put his hands on her shoulder then, and he said, I forgive you now in the name of God for sleeping with a married man. And I won't be telling anybody that your children were born on the wrong side of the blanket. Don't worry, he'll never come back here. He's been told not to set foot here. And she looked at him, and the news and her grief and the sorrow, it wasn't even anger yet, because she couldn't believe what she was hearing. And then the priest said, no, walk Nancy home. And as she was going out the door, he said, I'll see you on Saturday. Saturday was the night for the confessions, and he knew she would have digested the information by then. The policeman walked her home, and all that she was thinking when she was going home was how much was in the tea box. How would she eke it out to keep her children going? That all her plans were gone, that her Harry was gone. And she went in the door to her home. But the priest was not finished yet. He called the women around, and he didn't tell them any lie, but he didn't give them any information. He said, Harry's not coming home anymore. Nancy's rearing those children on her own. And Madge, with the cigarette always hanging out of the side of her mouth and one eye closed because she was so busy smoking, said, Father, don't worry, boy. We'll take care of that. The next day, she arrived up at Nancy's door. And when Nancy opened the door, there was Madge, a sight to behold, with a big stew pot in her hand. And she said, listen now, girl, my fella thinks I'm a great manager, so he does. But I got all my measurements mixed up and I made twice as much as I needed for the stew. So will you take this off my hands, if you don't mind, and never tell a soul? That was the way that the women had to help one another out without bringing shame down on poverty. And they called this the silent hand. Well, Nancy knew what Madge was doing, and she said, thanks very much. And she took it with great gratitude. And as she was taking it in, Madge said, I'll be wanting the pot back. That was a wedding present. And Nancy said, I'll pour the stew into my own pots now. And she says, no, girl, I'll come back for it on Friday. You see, that way Madge could keep an eye on her, and she could call into her, they could have the cup of tea, and they could get to know one another on a deeper level. 3 or 4 days after that, Mrs. Duggan arrived up at the door. Hello, girl. My fella's an awful idiot over there in England. Didn't he go and buy clothes for the children? And I told him I was after buying the clothes down the cold quay. Well, imagine if they woke up on Christmas morning and had 2 sets of clothes. They'd expect 2 sets of clothes every year from that moment forward. So she gave the clothes to Nancy, And Nancy worked her magic on them, the carbolic soap, the unpicking with the little pin. And in the night when the children were in bed, she made them their Christmas clothes. On Christmas Eve, all of the women in their shawls were on the one side of the North Cathedral with all of the children, and all the men were on the other side. And when the Mass was done, the priest came from the altar to have a talk with the flock. And he came to Nancy and he said, "How are you doing, girl? How are you doing?" And Madge put her arm around Nancy and pushed her back. And she says, "She's doing great, Father. Sure, she's one of our own." The highest compliment you could ever get in Cork City, to be called one of our own. Shinne Mushkale, that is my story. I hope it landed with you.
Oh, Maria.
Indeed, it landed. Yes. Wow.
Yeah. The girl who gave me that story, Denise, when she told me about the priest, I was like, "Oh my God," righteous indignation. And she said, no, girl. She said it was a different time and you can be a tourist in time. And she said that priest could have read my mother from the altar and let everybody know and added to the shame. But instead, we became part of the community and everybody was our mom then and everybody was our dad, and stuff. So, yeah.
Now, it's a great story about community. And it's, and it also, for me, it brings up what I love about story, because the parallels of culture and communities that we often just don't know exist, because you could pluck that story out of Cork and set it, I would imagine, all over the globe.
Yeah.
And it would be the same story and the same response. And I think too often we don't know that about others. We think our experience is unique to this place, this time, this community. And so much of it is just shared humanity. That's beautiful, beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. And to that point, Denise, one of the moments in that story that touched me in that way was the priest, but also the neighbor women who had this wonderful dodge to help somebody without embarrassing them. And that is such a powerful Jewish tradition as well. So and I don't mean to say exclusively, but we can find
absolutely.
that.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
As Maria was saying, I'm sorry.
The rule is that you shouldn't make somebody blush, even if your intentions are good, because when you blush, your cheeks grow red because of blood that fills them, right? And that we call spilling blood. And you should never spill another's blood. And and so gossip is equated to murder.
Wow.
For that reason. Yeah. So it's a powerful thing. But like you say, it goes in every direction to every culture. Yeah.
It does. It really brought back memories. I saw actual scenes where my mother and or father were having that moment with somebody who was in need. And I remember, if I can digress a moment, I shared with you where I lived. There was a house at the beginning of the street, which, in our community, everybody knew that they're just the least affluent of everybody in the neighborhood. And they were the most overtly racist. And they came against a very hard economic time. And friends of ours in the community who were taking up a collection for this family. And of course, they came to our house. And I can remember the whole conversation that my parents had. And I guess what I will say is that it was just an act of not charitable giving. It was an act of this is what we do. We're blessed to have this, and this is what we do when others need, and who they've been and what they've done have no bearing on what our responsibility is to community. And I will never forget that moment, because I thought, how could they do that? And, anonymously in the whole thing. So,
it's amazing.
So beautiful. Just a gorgeous, gorgeous story. And there's so much phrasing you use that I thought, I won't write it down, because if I do, it might crop up in my story.
I know. But that's the shared red thread, Denise. That's the shared red thread. So that's lovely.
That was phrased so beautifully, so succinctly, and just captured it.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
I come from an oral tradition, so a lot of stuff. So a lot of stuff, when it's said, I mean, I wish I could say they were my words, but oftentimes it's the words of the person who's told me, and I honor, So
yes. Well, I am going to have to draw this to a close, as much as I don't want to, but.
The chatting has started now, Jim.
The chatting has started, and the world, that one of those dimensions of time is about to come crashing down. So,
thank you for inviting me to this party.
It's
and
a joy.
I suppose on this episode in particular, we'd love it if our listeners have, if it's pricked, something in you. And if you have a story to tell, or a story that you're proud of, if you could leave it in the comments or send us an email. We read every single one. We read every single one.
We do.
So it would be great.
Nice.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
I look forward to it. Yep.
Yes, and we look forward
so much.
Thanks to another one of those dimensions of time. By the time this appears, we can have a link to the storytelling that you do.
Wonderful. Yes, I will send it to you. Great.
All right.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much. Great seeing you both.
You too.
Have a great rest of the day.
Will we say goodbye from Cork?
And goodbye from New York, but only for a while, because we'll be back again with another episode. Absolutely.
We can't wait to see you on the Story Road one more time. And from this time till that, be safe on the Story Road. Will we say goodbye from Cork?
And goodbye from New York, but only for a while, because we'll be back again with another episode. Absolutely.
We can't wait to see you on the Story Road one more time. And from this time till that, be safe on the Story Road.